Over to you.
All right. Thank you so much, Gil. And yes, it was Lauren Bacall, not Ingrid Bergman. But that's another story, another tour altogether. So thank you so much for coming out to or sitting in your house for this tonight. During the pandemic, tour guiding became a thing that we couldn't do. We couldn't do it in person, and we switched over to webinars. And I realized that doing webinars, you can cover a heck of a lot more ground and a lot more era than you could with a traditional in-person tour. So this tour was born out of that. It was born out of also my obsessive love of theaters, as Gil mentioned. I love theaters. I love the way they smell in a good way, not like, when you got like, dubious odors. I'm talking about, the mixture of, and this is going to sound gross, cigarettes and popcorn. But that's the way I remember theaters smelling once upon a time. This theater right here that you can see right here, Lowe's 83rd, this is where I saw my first movie, and I remember seeing it because I remember my mother and my grandmother got into a fight because my grandmother said I was too young to see Hey There, It's Yogi Bear. All right. Anyway, moving right along. These guys are not part of the tour. I just like the picture, so I use it because the Lowe's 83rd marquee is in the background. I can't tell what John Voight is in, but he's in something. Now, the big house is on Broadway. And why did it happen? It all has to do with the fact that this neighborhood, once the subway comes in, you have a very densely packed upper middle class residential area. And you need entertainment. You have restaurants all over the place, and you have theaters too. At one point between 74th Street, where the Beacon is, to 110th Street, where I end this, all right, there were 31,000 seats in theaters between 74th and 110th Street. That says something about a neighborhood. It says that either we are so bored we need to go to the movies all the time, or we're a densely packed residential neighborhood, or we just appreciate the art form. All right. So let's get moving. The Beacon Theater is the first stop on this tour. And the Beacon Theater is absolutely connected to, this man who designed it. His name is, it says right there, Walter Auschlager. And I'm sure I'm mangling his name, but Mr. Auschlager designed a very few theaters. He did mostly buildings in Detroit. He was centered in Chicago, but he will also work all throughout like the center of the country, like the Midwest from Texas up to Chicago through there. But the point is that he will design the Cathedral of the Motion Picture, the Roxy Theater. The Roxy Theater was the world's largest theater. Now, I always say this to people on tours, people from out of town, that in the city of New York, things are built for very few reasons: where they are and how they are. Grand Central Terminal is on 42nd Street because the city said you cannot bring a steam engine south of 42nd Street. So eventually a train station shows up. But the other reasons are anger, jealousy, spite, and ego. That's it. So on 50th Street and Broadway, the world's largest theater opened up in 1919, and that was the Capitol Theater. The Capitol Theater, designed by my favorite architect, Thomas Lamb. That theater, you're saying something about an industry when you do that. You're saying, we think it's going to be around for a while. Well, a film producer who was loosely tied to a few studios, but eventually Universal, Herbert Lubin, in 1925, comes up with this idea for even a bigger theater. And with that, attaching to it, a man named Samuel Lionel Rothafel. Samuel Lionel Rothafel, better known as Roxy, like the name on the theater. Mr. Samuel Lionel Rothafel, better known as Roxy, was the guy that figured out every which way to monetize anything out of a movie. He sold photographs. He sold sheet music from the score. The scores back then were played by either a Wurlitzer or some other similar organ or an orchestra. And in the case of the Roxy, it's going to be a big one. All right. So I just have that one too because I like it. But let's go inside. The Rotunda. This is what you first saw. And there's a wonderful New Yorker cartoon where there's a little girl holding her mother's hand, and it's clearly the lobby. The grand lobby. And the girl is saying, looking like off to the distance, and the mother's running obviously to get a seat. The girl says, "Mom, does God live here?" So the Cathedral of the Motion Picture. So the Grand Foyer, as it was technically known, had the world's largest Mohawk carpets made in Amsterdam, New York, world's largest oval rug. So that's an oval rug, and it weighed several tons. All right. This is a color, I believe, is a colorized photograph of the lobby, just to give you an idea of what it was, what it looked like. The marble is not real. I don't even think it was a veneer or marble. I think that is trompe l'oeil. But the point is that this was a spectacular lobby where several hundred people could wait inside for the next show. All right. Now let's go this way. Here we go. This is the architectural rendering of the theater. And the orchestra pit is going to be massive, except it won't be that massive. But what Schlager designed was a Spanish over-the-top Baroque gold and red theater. So that's what he is going to do. But there's a couple of innovative things, and you can see it here on the left side of the image, center left. There's those arches there, 6 arches. What those arches are the projection booth. The projection booth wasn't all the way up in the back. It was right there in the middle. So the throw from the projection booth does not go down, or like, let me just do it like that. It goes straight across. That was absolutely brilliant thing to do. All right. This is, I believe, a colorized photograph. I know it looks a little grainy, but I was very excited when I found it because these theaters were never photographed in color, and they were incredibly colorful. When you go to them, you go to the beautifully restored United Palace, used to be Lowe's 175th. That place has got colors all over it, and it's styles that did not exist in real life. In fact, if Southeast Asia had a Baroque era, it would look just like Lowe's 175th, but it's totally made up. All right, as is this. And you can see why it was called the Cathedral. This theater will seat, depending on who you believe, just under 6,000. So this is a very large theater. Cinema Treasures, which is a great website, great resource, put the capacity at 5,886. So that is a rather massive theater. All right, let's move on. This is a little bit more realistic. You can see the orchestra pit there. The orchestra pit held 110 musicians. All right. So 110 musicians, that is at the time, the largest permanent orchestra in the world. So that is absolutely amazing. There was also in the front of the orchestra pit, it's hard to tell, but there is a 3-console organ. So that is kind of incredible. And on the picture, on the photograph on the right side, you can see part of the what they ended up doing. It wasn't those arched windows from the projection booth, but it was actually just square windows. The point is that doing this, you get a sharper image with projection. So that is absolutely brilliant. Now, I love this image because this is like something you would not see as a regular person, but you're looking at the New York Philharmonic that was in here for a series of concerts in the late 50s, I believe over the summer, one of the summers of the late 50s, but it was not a permanent thing. So let's move on. All right. Now, this is the layout of the Roxy Theater. Schlager was good. He's not my favorite, but he was good at maximizing seating capacity in an oddly shaped lot. By turning the theater sideways, if you look all the way over to the left where you have the grand foyer and keep going to the left, that is 7th Avenue. So 50th Street is on the bottom. Imagine this. And then there's a hotel built on top of the grand foyer. That whole area is the Hotel Taft, which is now called something else. But the theater itself sat in an angle, kind of running on a diagonal. That way you can maximize seating capacity. But what it did create was a very awkward stage. It was wide, but not that deep. And it had 2 stage elevators as indicated, but the orchestra pit is practically as big as the stage. So it's kind of an amazing stage. It was a comedian, I think it was Joey Brown, who said, you better bring bread and water with you when you go on the Roxy stage because you're going to get lost, all right, because it's that big. So this theater and the shape of this theater is going to dictate something else, because what will happen is that Herbert Lubin, after he starts construction on the Roxy Theater in 1926, had the idea to build 5 smaller versions of the Roxy Theater throughout the city, one in every borough. So the one that was going to be in Manhattan, they started construction on what was going to be called the Roxy Midway, but they were running out of money. They ran out of money because this gigantic theater was costing more than they thought. So the construction on the Roxy Midway will stop. They had laid out the framework. They had basically used the same footprint, the same plan for the Roxy Midway as they used for the Roxy. And it will sit empty for quite some time. Then finally, the property will be sold to Warner Brothers, who will call it Warner's Beacon, a gift to Midtown. Even though it's in the Upper West Side, it's a gift to Midtown. So people in Midtown, you're welcome, all right? But it was, you know where it is. It's on 74th Street. So right here, opening night. So Monty Blue and Lupe Velez. All right. Those of you who don't know who Lupe Velez was, she was kind of like a late 20s through the 30s. Actually, she worked all the way up through the 40s. She was kind of, if you make just kind of like a comparison, she was the Sofia Vergara of her day. She was incredibly funny. She did a series called The Mexican Spitfire, which would never fly today. All right. But it was kind of like Blondie, the Blondie movies, but with a woman with a very heavy Latina accent. So that's who she was. But she was a very funny woman and seriously not as respected as she should have been. But that's who she is. There's opening this. I'm not sure exactly what this was from, but when I found it, I get excited when I find pictures of theater. So this was exciting too. All right. So you have that. Also, it was renamed, as you can see, Warner Brothers Beacon Theater. Still, it's a gift to Midtown, right? So this happened in the 70s, a in-person Tonight, Gloria Swanson and Lee Irwin at the Mighty Wurlitzer, because this theater did have a Mighty Wurlitzer. So this was a first-run house, and I remember seeing movies there as a kid. I also remember knowing that they were using it for traveling shows like the Flintstones. There was a Flintstones traveling show at some point in the late 60s, early 70s, and I remember looking down the orchestra pit of the Beacon Theater and seeing the Flintstones car was sitting right there waiting for another, like I think the next day's performance. I think they did live performance of the Flintstones during the day, and at night they showed movies. But in 1974, Variety reported Baby Roxy, that's what they called this. Baby Roxy, Upper Broadway, Byzantium Beacon seeks future as live act shrine. That's what they're going to do with this. Oh, there's the organ. I almost forgot I had this picture. There you go. And it does become a live act, shrine. In fact, Kiss, in one of their early performances, you can see, if you're familiar with this band, besides the makeup, we have two former New York City public school teachers in this band, by the way. But the other thing is that look at their setup on the right side. It's very plain. Their stage setup became so elaborate they could never play the Beacon with what they would bring on stage. Their apparatus, the cranes, the lifts, all that stuff, you couldn't be supported by that stage. So that's kind of amazing. The Eagles in 1974. All right. And by the way, 1974 was the year the Guides Association of New York was founded. There you go, 50 years ago this year. And the Eagles were playing at the Beacon. Also, the Allman Brothers will make this their home. They made this their home starting in 1989. They're going to be playing their they started with 3 shows, and eventually they're starting playing like 10 nights. They did 10 nights, and each spring they would do it. But there was a problem because the Beacon will undergo a ownership change and also a restoration. And people like Bob Dylan will play there. The Tony Awards were done from there. That's kind of amazing. But and when Greg Allman passed away, they noted it on their marquee, like the lights go down on Broadway for a minute. This is how they acknowledged it. What did happen is that the Beacon will undergo a massive restoration. And right after they were finished with that year-long renovation, a show called Banana Spiel moves in. That was a Cirque du Soleil show that I saw and was not that good. All right. But it was worth it being in the theater. So that's how it's going to be. The Beacon Theater being closed down, though, will make Lowe's 175th, the United Palace, a viable entertainment venue. And it started to become that. The Allman Brothers will play there that year and not play at the Beacon. All right. So now this is the Beacon lobby. All right. And it has a certain familiarity. It's laid out exactly the same as something else I just showed you. All right. That's the interior. I took these pictures summer of 2023. This is a setup for Elvis Costello, and the opening act was, what's his name? Nick Lowe. So that's set up actually for Nick Lowe, and then behind it is Elvis Costello. But look at that ceiling. What this theater is, and the interior decoration is very different, incredibly different than the Roxy. This is a traveling caravan. So let me just go back to this image. You can't really see it, but you can see those poles on either side of the proscenium. What those are tent poles holding up a tent over the stage. Let me see if I have one. I don't know if I do, but there you go. That's looking at the dome and the balcony. And you can see these are all about trade and travel. You got the camels there. They're going through the desert. So that's what this is. You can sort of see all the way on the right side, left side, that is supposed to be fabric. I'm not sure what they used. I'm sure it's plaster on some sort of metal mesh. But the Beacon Theater, depending on who you believe, Cinema Treasure says 3,154 seats. Wikipedia 2,894 seats, and the Beacon Theater, according to something in 1929, sat 2,600. 3,000 is in the 3,000 range is what this theater is. All right. So let's move on. There's the mural treatment on the other side. And that is just to show you that the tent over the stage sort of thing. And the stage is at the same odd angle as the Roxy Theater. So this is a mini Roxy. It has a loge right there and then a balcony as well. It's a very shallow theater, but they squeeze as much seating as they could out of it. So there you go. Now, on the left side is the Beacon Theater. On the right side is the Roxy Theater. You cannot tell me that they don't look alike. There's a similarity. Even though their basic framework had been done, part of the lobby had been done as well. The interior of the auditorium had not been done. So that's what that is. So what happened to the Roxy? Well, the Roxy's first movie was a Gloria Swanson picture, Love of Sonia. All right. So this is something that she independently produced, and Roxy selected it to be the opening night picture for his theater. All right. And then the Roxy is going to go the way of other big houses like the Paramount, the Strand, the Capitol. All those theaters are going to disappear within 10 years of each other, starting with the Roxy, the biggest one of them all. And Life magazine sent a photographer with Gloria Swanson, whose movie opened the theater, to take a picture inside the rubble of the Roxy Theater. And this allegedly inspired our friend Harold Prince to do the show Follies. All right, that's where according to the theater legend, this is what it was based on. The next theater uptown is, in terms of the big houses, because there's a theater in between the Beacon and this. This is the 81st Street Theater. The 81st Street Theater was designed by this man, Thomas Lamb. Thomas Lamb, who studied architecture at Cooper Union, actually majored in mechanical drawing and acoustics. Very important, because he's designing a theater in a non-microphone era, right? So you have to be able to project your voice to a theater that sometimes is 1,800 seats, sometimes it's bigger, and the theater has to help you do it because no one is wearing a microphone. So that's a problem, right? So Thomas Lamb was a Scottish immigrant, came here when he was 12 years old. He will set up his office on 40th Street, and he will start designing theaters. He had been a building inspector for the city after getting out of Cooper Union, and shockingly, never got his architect license. He was an unlicensed architect who was working up pretty much to the day he died. All right, so moving right along, this is the House Beautiful on 81st Street. He is, this theater will see, let me get my note here. There we go. It's according to, again, Cinema Treasures, 2,115, sorry, 2,015 seats. All right. It opened on June 1st, 1916. And this is kind of important. Theaters that opened up prior to 1917 were built without air conditioning. I am not saying that every theater built after 1917 was built with air conditioning, but the air conditioning systems were not invented until the Rivoli Theater did it first. And guess who designed that theater? That guy, Thomas Lamb. So the 81st Street was intended mainly as vaudeville with photoplays as an added attraction. They're not ready to give up on the vaudeville yet. All right. So this is I believe this is from the opening week. All right. Here we go. This is the line for a movie called R. Teddy, which opened in 1919. In 1928, Rudy Valley and his group, this musical group, the Connecticut Yankees, they appeared here and caused a riot out in the street, kind of like Justin Bieber or the Beatles kind of riot. The theater was noted for a gorgeous mural, which I'm going to show you in a second. I forgot I had the lobby pictures. This is the original entrance from the street, so the street would be behind us. And now we're looking towards the inner lobby. But here's the auditorium. All right. So the mural done by Arthur Brownett, which I'm sure I'm not pronouncing correctly, it was called Music and Dancing, was painted on the soundboard above the proscenium. This was a painter, a muralist that Lamb used over and over again. He tended to use the same people over and over again, like Rambush Studios and, of course, Arthur Brownett. If you ever go to the AMC 25 on 42nd Street, that was the Thomas Lamb Theater, and the mural above the proscenium on the soundboard, that is an Arthur Brownett mural. All right, let's see if a better, wrong way. That way, there's Music and Dance. All right, Music and Dancing actually above the proscenium. So the stage would be behind us. All right. So I'm not sure when this was taken, but it's definitely prior to 1939. The orchestra pit is still there. It hasn't been covered up yet. The footlights are obviously working, and that strange looking thing that looks like a piano, that is an organ. I'm not sure what kind of organ they had in there, but there you go. But in 1939, this is going to be dramatically altered. It's about to all change to a more modern style, even though you still have those little things along the edge there that kind of give you a feeling like, well, this was redone. All right. So they redid it in 1939. This was not uncommon. Theaters went through a modernization and update kind of thing. Not uncommon at all. All right. So yeah, even the lobby got an update. So again, the street is behind us, and there is an usher, and that's looking out into the street, which they still have that ticket booth out there. The box office window, which I don't know if you noticed it in a picture before, that was over on the left side of this image, that was gone. So whatever was in there, I don't know what's in there now, but this is, a very altered structure. So this theater is going to close in late December 1953. Coming soon, it says right there, opening Christmas, The Robe with Richard Burton. That's going to open there. But what does happen after that, in 1954, this will be purchased by CBS. CBS is going to take it and use it as their first color TV studio, and it was called CBS Studio 72. There it is, with somebody on a horse for some reason. And when I found this picture, I was very excited because I never found a CBS logo on the theater. So the first production that's going to be broadcast from here, and it will be live, will be the only thing that Rodgers and Hammerstein ever wrote for TV. It's going to be Cinderella. Cinderella starring Julie Andrews. All right. I love this picture because that guy who's playing Prince Charming right there, if you ever watch the show Hill Street Blues, that is what was his character's name? Commissioner Daniels, I think was his name, but that's John Cypher. Brooklyn-born John Cypher did have a career before Hill Street Blues and even after Hill Street Blues. Good for him, all right? But this was done live. There were 56 performers, 33 musicians, and 80 stagehands in a tiny space. It may have been a big theater, but it was a tiny soundstage. That's what it was, all right? But the soundstage will eventually be sold to Reeves Teletape. They'll acquire it in 1969, and something's going to happen there. Oh, well, right here. This is actually a digitally created image, but here's a real image. There it is. That's Sesame Street, except Mr. Hooper there on the right side looks like he's chasing these kids. Hey, you kids, come back with those candy bars, that kind of thing. But there's Hooper's store right there, right? And there is a break during taping. And eventually this is going to move out to Kaufman Astoria because there's too many people here. They need a bigger space for it, right? So much bigger. Electric Company moves in 1971, a game show called 3-2-1 Contact. Also, this show, Love Sydney, in 1981 with the first openly gay character on TV. Then we also have, of course, my favorite, Jerry Lewis in King of Comedy, playing Jerry Langford. All right, there you go. They use the space for that. And then the final thing before the last bits of this theater was Search for Tomorrow, which I was an extra on, and there was nothing left of the interior of this theater. It had all been gutted, and I couldn't believe they actually had to do this show live once, which is incredible. But it was demolished in 1986, finally. They finally just tore down the theater part of it, but they left the taxpayer structure, the white brick and terracotta structure on the outside, which became still a Staples and a Starbucks, right? So there you go. But they saved that part, did not really incorporate the building that was built behind it into it, which is too bad. What are you going to do? All right. But moving right up from there is this, Lowe's 83rd. And I'll give you one guess who designed it. I swear, you go into my tour, you're going to think like 4 people designed New York. One guy designed all the theaters, and then McKim, Mead and White, Hardenberg, and I don't know who else. Emery Roth designed the rest of the city. All right. Anyway, Lowe's 83rd. Lowe's 83rd Street opened on September 26, 1921 with a policy of vaudeville and a feature film, right? There you go. 2,633 seats. There you go. Absolutely beautiful. It was also very similar to the old Lowe's State in Times Square, which opened the same year, 1921, except it opened up in August. All right. There's an exterior shot from 1939. All right. That's what that is. This is a shot from 1931. And the reason we know this is because the movies that are playing there or coming soon we have Stolen Heaven playing there in 1931, but coming soon will be D.W. Griffith's Abraham Lincoln. So don't know why that happened like that, but this was a first run house. All right. Moving right along, this is the outer lobby. And then we're going to move inside. All right. And I don't know who remembers this theater, but I do vividly remember this staircase. When you came in, the staircase was directly on your right. Exit 16 and 17 lead you on to 83rd Street. This is one of the few pictures I have of the house. And you can see there is an organ all the way on the left side. But because of the magic of PowerPoint, I was able, and also whatever the photo program that comes with a Mac, I was able to zoom in a little tighter. You can see that. I can't quite tell if the orchestra pit is still there, because in 1939, the orchestra pit will be covered over. And they did this all the time in theaters. In fact, there were theaters that had organs that rose up on a lift. They would cover up that. They would leave a console down there buried under concrete slabs just to add a few extra rows of seats. But this did add 30 more seats. So that's kind of amazing. Now, going back to this image from before, you can see there's like a separate side rail for the side boxes on the orchestra floor. You do have a whole row of boxes, 3 on each side, but separate on the bottom 2. So that those were removed, those side rails were removed, and that added space for 25 more seats by getting rid of that actual physical barrier. All right. So I don't remember that, but I do remember the boxes there. Absolutely. So this is a set that was probably for showing the movie, because remember, movie screens were not wide until after The Robe. All right. The Robe was the first wide screen. I think it was The Robe, or oh my goodness, it's the one with Victor Mature, and Groucho Marx said something really unpleasant about it. But the point is that they would have a set around the screen, and that is the set around the screen. So I do think this is 1929. All right, that's under the balcony, and what you're not getting are the kind of like orange and very kind of burnt orange tones. It was beautiful. I'm not doing it justice with my description, but what's significant is that you do have ducting for air conditioning, because this was built in 1921, opened in 1921 anyway. All right, there's the dome. That's what the dome was. And remember, these are movie theaters, so it's not going to have a huge chandelier. That would have been problematic with projection coming from all the way up there. All right. And there's the side row of boxes. And there's a close-up. And I think I even get closer. Yeah, I got too close. You can see there's cherubs above those doors there. But I remember those boxes actually being accessible from the balcony very easily when I was a kid. I would actually remember. I'll tell you in a minute. All right. Anyway, there's one of the organ installations. There were at least 2 different Mahler organs, which are not quite as good as Wurlitzer's, but they're a decent organ. There were 2. First one was installed originally in 1921. This is probably the larger 1926 organ, because as theaters started to cut back, even during the late 20s, before the Depression hit, they're cutting back on stage shows and also cutting back on the number of musicians. There were musicians that played for the movie. That's the thing. In the houses like the Roxy, the Capitol, the Strand, even in Lowe's State, they would have an orchestra that played along with the movie for every show. A theater like Lowe's 83rd, they would an organ, which is basically an analog synthesizer, that would play for the daytime shows, but the nighttime show, that would be an orchestra that would play for that. All right. Now, this is 1939, because the movie on the marquee in this ad is William Holden in Golden Boy, which came out in 1939. And this is going on about how wonderful the new seats are at Lowe's 83rd. And for the longest time, that was the only picture of the interior of the Lowe's 83rd available online once upon a time. The other pictures I purchased from the Theater Historical Society of America. All right, so what happens to this theater? All right, well, it's going to go through a bunch of changes. It's going to first start, and this is 1961. The marquee is not original, but this was the longtime marquee. All right. This is 1966 on the left side, 1971 on the right side. I love the neon. Neon is a lost, dying art. And then we have this picture right here. This is, of course, 1971, because only during the matinees you'd have Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory playing there. All right, there you go. This is actually 1970. And what does happen, and this is my ticket, I can't believe I saved it, right? Lowe's 83rd became a triplex in 1975. And there you go. This is 1975. You have Cooley High, White Line Fever, and Roger Daltrey in Tommy. And I saw it there. I remember seeing it there. Also, you see, it says learn to drive. That's where I took my second set of driving lessons. All right, there you go. Anyway, point is that this became a triplex, but unfortunately, they're not done yet. It will become a quad in 1982. And for a brief period of time, there were 10 screens between 83rd and 84th Street because Lowe's 84th had opened, and there was a brief overlap. But finally, May of 1985, Lowe's 83rd will be torn down. And during the teardown process, they found, well, remember this marquee? Look at that. Ugh, blech, boring. All right. But look at that. The old marquee was there, but it gets better. All right. They stripped, and look, the West Side Republican Club is going to have to find another home. All right. But they found the original framework from the original marquee, which I don't have a picture of, but there it is. Just kept the same frame, just added things or took things away over the years. Now, the next big house up along Broadway had 3 different names over the course of its existence. It began life as the Adelphi and eventually became the Yorktown and then became the New Yorker. All right. So here we are with the Adelphi right here. Now, I'm not sure what year this picture was taken, but the theater opened in 1914, August 26, 1914, with a capacity of 1,021 lucky individuals. All right. There is the Adelphi with a structure on top, and that, given the car there, it looks a little bit later. And there's a Nedix on the corner. Unbelievable. All right. So this is from, I believe, from this is from 1918. This is a program. Theaters used to have programs. And the thing about this program is that there's wonderful ads from things in the neighborhood, but it's telling you about the movie, what's playing next, that kind of thing. Alice Brady, whose cousin lived on near 103rd Street. Very important person in motion picture history, even though he wasn't an actor. It was because of him that Humphrey Bogart ended up on stage, but that's another tour and another story. But here we can see a sort of a floor plan for the theater, and I don't believe that this theater ever had a stage. So that means it was built expressly for movies, and maybe that it looks like an orchestra pit of some kind. There is some sort of platform, but that's about it. All right. There's no big backstage area indicated on this. They wouldn't have done that for fire exits, but given the location of the fire exits on either side of the screen where it says orchestra, I don't know, thinking it wasn't, but that's the movie that was playing. Marguerite Clark in a picturization of Eleanor Halliwell Abbott's celebrated delightful romance, Molly Make-Believe, produced by famous players Lasky. All right, but moving right along. Eventually, this will become known as the Yorktown in 1933. It underwent a severe redo done by the architectural firm Boak and Paris, who also designed 315 Riverside, and if I'm not mistaken, 230 Riverside as well, in addition to a whole bunch of other things. But in 1959, it became the New Yorker. The first twin bill of the New Yorker Theater was Henry V, the 1945 Henry V, and the Red Balloon, which ran for 3 weeks, constantly filling the theater, which was kind of cool. Now, this theater will be twinned eventually. All right. Just some random shots of what was playing there. Love it. I love that that's a Buick right there. I don't think that's a Cadillac. Maybe it's a Cadillac. But the point is that you have, this was before video stores, before my old industry ruined it. All right, this is where you went to see it. Now you can also notice that I don't know if you can see it. You can't see it, but there was a medallion that's obviously off the building there. It was the Huntress Diana. It got blown off during a storm and was actually on top of the marquee for years, and no one ever went and got it. So what does happen in this theater, and there's an interior shot of the theater. I was very excited when I got this from the Theater Historical Society of America. It will be twinned. And the architect for the twinning of this theater was a man named John McNamara, who had actually been Thomas Lamb's partner for the last 10 years of his life and twinned and ruined a lot of Thomas Lamb theaters. What are you going to do? The New Yorker is famous for this. Yes, Woody Allen and Diane Keaton, listening to the man behind him go on about Marshall McLuhan and his theories about media and hot media, cold media, and all that. And Woody Allen gets to an argument, and then, of course, Marshall McLuhan steps out from behind the billboard and corrects the man on the left. And he says, "Don't you wish life was like this?" Yes, it's only like this in a movie, right? There you go. Now, the next, and this is what's sitting on this spot now, one of the least interesting buildings on the Upper West Side. There it is. All right. But moving right up along Broadway, we do have a theater that I remember not as a theater, but as something else. But originally was called the Standard Theater. It opened on September 5th, 1914. It was called Court's Standard Theater, and the court in this case is John Court, like the recently renamed Court Theater. It's now the James Earl Jones Theater. But guess who designed it? Guess who designed both those theaters? Thomas Lamb. So this is a kind of sketchy photograph I found online somewhere, but at this point it will become the Stoddard. By 1925, it is the Stoddard, and I can date this from, well, because of the movie that's playing there, The Power and the Glory, with Colleen Moore and Spencer Tracy, who, by the way, lived on the Upper West Side briefly back in his early days as an actor trying to make it on Broadway. But 1933 is the date of that movie. All right. This is obviously 1939. This is a tax ID photo because there's the man with the stand and pointing up to the theater on its lot number and block number and all that good stuff. And playing there is The Real Glory with David Niven, Gary Cooper, and of course, those high gray walls, right? There we go. That's what's playing there in 1939. And moving right along, this is a wonderful photograph. This is from 1943, I believe. Let's see. Yes, 1943, because there's something about a soldier and what a woman came out in 1943. But going back to this for 1 second, this is also starting to age a little bit, which is kind of sad, right? But there it is. And you know what's also nice is that that flower shop was there forever until it wasn't, but it was around for quite a long time. Now, this theater never had air conditioning because remember, it was opened in 1914. That's 3 years before air conditioning becomes a viable thing in a theater. So this theater was built without air conditioning, and my mother, who lived diagonally across the street on 90th Street, and this is on 90th, you can see right there, 90th Street and Broadway, that's the southwest corner of 90th and Broadway. She told me that theater would shut down in the summer because, no one's going to go to a hot theater. What for, right? But the last movie that played there was 1953, and that was Shane. Shane played there. But this is how I remember it, as the Garden, well, not as the Garden Market, but that's its first incarnation. And this is a screen grab from a movie by a director named Chuck Workman. And we also could probably do this with The Odd Couple as well, probably a better shot too, but it was a date shop well by the time I was conscious. So there you go. But they kept the marquee. That was one of the iterations of the marquee for the Stoddard Theater. And it was a date shop well for a long time until it was replaced by this thing. There you go. Ugh. All right. So that's that. Now, the Symphony Thalia, all right, and the Thalia. I kind of lumped them together. This is a structure that was built originally as a market. In fact, you could barely make it out, but it does say Astor Market. In 1917, plans were put forth to convert this into a 2,760-seat theater. That doesn't happen, but what does happen is that the Crystal Carnival Skate Palace moves in 1917. So that was there, and around the side, there was a restaurant called the Sunken Garden. You can see it all the way on the right side of the image. Beneath that arched window there, there's an entryway, all right? This was the plan eventually in 1918. A 1,411-seat theater was put forth, and I had heard it once upon a time that it had been a dance hall too, because if you remember, the symphony is not all that raked. In fact, it's rather flat, and there is a small stage big enough for a large dance band, right? So you have like 30 musicians on a stage. You don't want them all on top of each other. That's kind of terrible, right? Now, what does happen is that the Sunken Garden restaurant will be converted. But first, I have to show you this. This is the theater being an active theater. This is in 1971. There you go, because the movie's playing there. Valdez is Coming with Burt Lancaster. And I remember this movie, Cold Turkey, because the whole town goes cold turkey. They give up smoking for 30 days. All right. I gave it up for 20 plus years. All right. Anyway, moving along. The Thalia will open in 1931 in the space that was occupied by the Sunken Garden restaurant. Most of us remember this theater and had that odd sloping up toward the screen. Most theaters slope down towards the screen. This one sloped up. That was done on purpose. Absolutely. All right. And there it is. These are from Architects and Builders. So these are right before the theater opened to the public. And it opened up with a capacity of 300, just on 299. Now the capacity of the Leonard Nimoy Thalia Theater is only 161. In 1978, though, The symphony kind of secured its future when they did a live concert. The future is going to be live performances there. Wall to wall Bach in January of 1978 was such a success, it took the owners by surprise. And there you go. But the next theater uptown from there, or the next set of theaters uptown from there, are personal favorites of mine because they are just, oh, there's one more shot of the Thalia. I forgot about that one. I cannot tell you how many movies I saw there because there's just way too many. All right. But there's some ads for it. Yes, you got the good and the bad Marx Brothers on May 9th. There you go. Because big stores, but Night at the Opera, that's pretty good. All right. But moving right along, the Riverside, Riviera, and the Hidden Gardens of Broadway. These are important because where they are. So this is a contractor ad. All right. The contractor, Liebman Contracting Company. Well, it says what he does. He builds a lot of apartment buildings, a lot of theaters, but they will build both of these theaters. Built by William Fox in 1911, the Riverside Theater will open, but then will be taken over by the Keith Albee people. B.F. Keith and his people take over, and they will remodel it and will reopen again in 1916. What they did, and the story is that they threatened William Fox. William Fox, before the name 20th Century Fox, William Fox was a theater owner. He was an exhibition guy, right? He had a lot of theaters all up in New York, the Fox in Brooklyn, the Fox, the Audubon Theater up in Harlem, Washington Heights, where Malcolm X was assassinated in there. William Fox was threatened with the loss of any Keith act. If you do not give us this theater, if you do not sell us this theater, you'll never get a Keith act in your theater. So that was a serious threat because those are some talented people in there, and they were money makers because they were a draw, right? Absolutely. So very important. So according to Cinema Treasures, the seating capacity of the Riverside Theater was 1,710. According to the Theater Historical Society of America, 1,772. A little bit of a difference. All right. But moving right along, this is looking uptown as all the theaters there are in place. And again, all of this was designed by Thomas Lamb. All right. Moving right along, why are the theaters at 96th Street going to be so important? Because look at that. That's 96th Street and Riverside Drive, right? And those are kids crossing train tracks. All right. They come from the river, which is behind us, right? And now they're walking towards up towards West End. All right. So let me see if I have another image of that. No, I don't, but I do have this. That is a train that's sitting there. Now this is all covered over. That was all covered over during the West Side Improvement Project. And there's a passenger car at the end of that train. That is not unusual. It's not unusual to see a passenger car at the end of a work train, but those are a bunch of baggage cars. And then you have this passenger car. Vaudeville shows traveled as a unit. They were traveled as a package. And up until not that long ago, scenery flats were cut or built to be able to fit through a door of a freight car, like you see right there in that image, right? So that's very important. All right. So this is all going to change, of course, and by 1938. Hey, I could see my house from here. All right. Anyway, the Riverside Theater was high-end vaudeville, which means 2 shows a day, not 8 shows a day. Look who's going to be playing there next week. Ethel Barrymore in a 1-act drama. They would mix it up, right? And this was the house orchestra for this theater. Julius Lensberg and the Riverside Orchestra. This orchestra was so good that they recorded a bunch of, they covered a bunch of tunes on the Edison label, things like that. And Lensberg was the musical director for the George White Scandals in 1919. He had a recording career on his own, and then he ended up being a music agent, died in 1956. But let's go inside the Riverside Theater. There are the original boxes. Remember, this is a vaudeville theater. It showed movies in between the acts sometimes, but it was built for live entertainment. Now, vaudeville, all right, sometimes has a negative connotation. And before Rosa Ponselle, the opera diva, was an opera diva, her name was Rosa Ponzilla, all right? She and her sister, Carmela, they were an act. They were Italian, and they sang, so they were called the Italian Girls. They were Italian singing girls. And this is where she will be discovered by a music teacher / agent, and that will lead her to the Met and, of course, opera diva-ness, right? So very important stop. This is the interior right after it opened. You can see there's on the stage there, all the way on the left side, will be stage right if you're facing out to the house, or house left if you're facing the stage. There's a sign there that tells you what act is playing, right? Now the soundboard above has a mural. I'm not sure who did the mural, and it does not exist anymore. All right, none of this exists anymore. The Riviera Theater was also built with, sorry, the Riverside Theater was also built. Oh, I forgot about that one too. That's the house, looking out in the house. And the Riverside Theater was built with a rooftop that sat 1,640 people. Unbelievable. So this is in the pre-air conditioning days. So this is a theater that was built without air conditioning. In 1929, there was an article in the Times that said that the beginning March 21st, 1929, the Riverside will drop movies and just be vaudeville 2 shows a day. So they're kind of like taking a step backwards because vaudeville is going to die. All right. It's also very expensive. All right. Now, I love this picture because this is a picture that was taken by a guy named George Mann. George Mann was part of an act called Bardo and Mann, and George Mann photographed every marquee his name was on. There's a whole collection of these photographs out there on the internet, right? So he took this picture. That's them. They were a comedy act. That's Dewey Bardo, the shorter guy, and the tall guy is George Mann. This was their act. One guy's tall, one guy's short. But the thing about, they were funny though. So they're better than I'm telling you now. George Mann became a photographer once the act got kind of old, right? And vaudeville's kind of dead. But this guy, Dewey Bardo, had a daughter. You might recognize her. That's Nancy Walker, who had a huge Broadway career and a limited movie career, but she was a great performer. So good for her. That's her dad right there. That's why she's so tiny, because Dewey Bardo was tiny also. And what happened to George Mann? He became King Vitamin. All right, moving right along. This is a shot from the 1920s showing looking uptown, looking at 96th Street, looking at the Riverside and the Riviera, which I'm going to get to in a second. This is obviously the early 20s. And very similar to, well, going back to 1 second, look at just the exterior structure. You can always tell it's a Lamb Theater just by the style of the exterior structure. So there is the Hamilton Theater, which is just known as the Hamilton. It is intact. I have pictures of it, not for this webinar, but for others, I will use it. This is still standing at 146th and Broadway on the uptown side of Broadway. And the theater is intact. There you go. And this is Lowe's Avenue B, which was built in 1913, same year that, well, 1912 was when the Hamilton opened. 1913 is when this one opened. Again, vaudeville and movies, and it was built on the site of the tenement that Marcus Lowe had grown up in. All right. Marcus Lowe was an Eastern European Jew who fancied himself to be a Western European Jew when he moved up to Harlem. So that's another tour altogether. So the Riverside, this is the Riverside 1939. And the reason why we know this is 1939, because what's playing there, The Honeymoon's Over, and of course, a reissue, it wasn't a reissue, it came out I believe it came out in 1938, but the Roaring Twenties. And there it is again, there's the Riviera side of it. And in this is again 1939. This is 1940, because playing at the Riviera Theater is Ghost Breakers, along with Sporting Blood. Those both came out in 1940. But in 1953, the Riviera Theater will undergo a $500,000 renovation by the Skouras brothers. The Skouras brothers were exhibitors from the Midwest, but Spiros Skouras was the longest serving as president of 20th Century Fox. The only reason he lost his job was because of Cleopatra in 1964. But there you go. Now, moving right along, there's the Riviera Theater in 1953. The reason why we know this is 1953 is, and this is right after that renovation in 1949. Who remembers the Barton chocolates? I do. All right, I remember that neon sign. It was absolutely beautiful. And Hanscom was a bakery, which I believe there was an article about the stores on Broadway, and this was mentioned in one of the articles on the Bloomingdale Neighborhood History Group's blog. But we know that this is 1953 because playing at the Riverside is Walking My Baby Back Home with Donald O'Connor and Janet Leigh, and Jack Slade with Mark Stevens, who was a really good actor, underrated. There you go. And if you ever see, there's a movie he did with Lucille Ball called Dark Corner. Excellent movie. All right. Anyway, also coming soon to the Riviera, I believe, is this Forbidden with Tony Curtis and Joan Drew. Now, big houses like this generally are not going to survive because they're just too darn big, all right? But we have to go inside first before we see the demise. So this is going into the Riverside. That is the Riverside. And I'm not sure where that light is coming from. All right. The person that took these pictures was not a professional photographer. His name was Michael Miller, and Michael Miller was a lawyer. He worked for the I don't even think it exists anymore, but it was Health and Hospitals Corporation. He was a lawyer for them, and he was a theater enthusiast. This is someone I wish I knew, but he died young. So unfortunately, his theory about photographing theaters is that you go to the worst neighborhoods, you go on a Sunday morning, and the people that you have to worry about are either paying for it or praying for it, so you don't have to worry. All right, but there's the stage at the Riverside Theater, which was used sporadically through the 1940s for talent shows. My mother remembers being had told me that she had remembered being at a talent show at the Riviera Theater. The orchestra pit, though, appears to be covered up. Definitely was already covered up because it wasn't there when I was a kid, and that got you a couple extra rows of seats, and the boxes are gone because they're, in the way of projection. This is detail of the proscenium arch. What these guys used were molds to make these things, plaster molds, and they just repeated things all over. And this just repeats, horns and all that, cherub, horns, cherub, all the way up and around the proscenium arch. All right. There's another, going back to it for a second just to show you. There you go. And that's the soundboard. And the thing about the soundboard, it's I have a theory about it. I'm gonna have another shot of it. That's Christopher Columbus stepping foot on land. So Christopher Columbus discovering America is, I believe, the theme of the Riverside Theater. All right, not Henry Hudson, but Christopher Columbus, because in this image in the ceiling, this is from the ceiling, and this is another Michael Miller photograph. There's Christopher Columbus talking to the king and the queen. That's the queen in the gold gown there. And he's pointing, I'm going that way. And the world is not flat, is basically what he's saying. So this is a beautiful detail up in the ceiling dome there. That is probably the original light fixture. There was nothing big and major hanging from the middle of that dome. And you can see there's the panel I just showed you. And you can also see all the dirt around the air conditioning ducts, which are not original. Also, I didn't know that was up there because when I was a kid, I would go see movies here, and those theaters were so dark, the balcony was always closed. So I was never up in the balcony the way I'm about to be in these images. And that's the house left side of the balcony. And you can see the cable on the floor there. That's because they couldn't figure out how to turn the lights on. So they used their own lighting for this. They bought in lighting, and they, obviously supplementing the lighting. So and you can see all those air conditioner ducts with dirt rings around them because that's what they did. Now, the Riviera this is the original one of the early photographs of the Riviera. The Riviera also was not quite done. You can see there's ladders all over the place. And here's this other shot, which shows you the original entrance and the soon to be open Riviera roof. All right. The Riviera roof was a mystery. When I was a kid, my grandmother had several strokes, and she told me that there was another theater. All right. Anyway, the Riviera was eventually leased to the Schuberts in 1918. The Schubert brothers will lease it, and they'll call it eventually the Schubert Riviera Theater. This is one of the few early interior shots I've ever found of the Riviera. All right, there you go. But there it is at Schubert's Riviera Theater. And eventually what's going to happen is that they will end their lease in 1931, and when that happened in October of 31, another person will take over. But this is something that happened only in New York. So this is a program from the Schubert Riviera Theater, and I love it because you've got these ads here also, right? But this was something called the Subway Circuit, and this is something that only happened in New York, as far as I know. A show would play on Broadway. It would play at 600 performances. That's enough. Get out of here already, right? Show doesn't have to run for 30 years. All right. That was unheard of in the 20s. So a show would run, and then they would pack it up, right? And they would bring it to a theater like the Windsor in the Bronx, or a theater out in Brooklyn called, there was a few theaters out in Brooklyn, or to the Schubert Brothers Riviera Theater. And then after playing there for a week at a seriously reduced ticket price, the show would go on the road. And what road was that? A railroad. So this theater was perfectly situated with direct access to 96th Street to the New York Central Freight tracks right there. Absolutely. But in 1931, the lease will change hands. It will actually be leased by this man, Chamberlain Brown. Chamberlain Brown Players present Lysistrata, All right. Chamberlain Brown was an actor, director, agent who claimed to have discovered Clark Gable. The list goes on and on, by the way. Clark Gable, Helen Hayes, Alfred Lunt, Rudolph Valentino, yet. All right. Leslie Howard, Jeanette MacDonald, Jack Haley, the guy who played the Tin Men in Wizard of Oz, in case you don't remember, Don Amici, Preston Foster, Robert Walker, Glenda Farrell, Carlotta Monterey, she was eventually Mrs. Eugene O'Neill, Conrad Nagel, Tahula Bankhead, also Helen Menken, the first Humphrey Bogart, and a few other people as well. The Brown Agency represented a whole lot of people, including John Carradine and Dorothy Gish, Hal Holbrook eventually, Spencer Tracy, and Tom Ewell, who once actually worked in the agency itself. But there you go. There's a whole list of people he says he claims to have discovered. Walter Houston, too, got that. And this is a note to compliment somebody. I just liked the letter, so I kept it. And this is the program. Lysistrata, right? Jean Arthur, Sidney Greenstreet, I highlighted, and Fred de Cordova. That is possibly the producer of The Tonight Show when Johnny Carson was on The Tonight Show, because he went into production, eventually was an actor originally, then he became a producer, a TV producer, and ended up producing The Tonight Show. So I'm pretty sure it's the same guy. But the point is, Sidney Greenstreet and Jean Arthur, as it says in her bio, Jean Arthur's appeared on the legitimate stage, but is best remembered for her work in the talkies. But she came back to New York, and when she went back to California, her career really took off in the talkies. And Sidney Greenstreet was already known as a great Shakespearean actor, but of course, these guys would go on to huge, huge fame, right, in motion pictures. So there you go. So this is the Riviera Theater. See the sign, balcony closed, right? Because it always was, but this was taken from the balcony. Those footlights are still working, and that's what's lighting up that screen. And what you can, I don't know if you can tell, but the whole thing around the proscenium arch, all that plaster work, it's all pineapples. And I love this work on either side of where the boxes would have been once upon a time. This is something that Lamb repeated in another theater. I like that picture too, because you can see the same thing. All right. And that huge medallion above the proscenium arch, above the soundboard, or on the soundboard. But this is the Regent Theater, which opened in 1913. It sort of has the same treatment over the boxes. This is now the First Corinthian Baptist Church, and the mural on the soundboard is the Surrender of Granada as envisioned by painter Francisco Pardillo. All right, so this was a copy of an existing painting. All right, and there's that picture again, and I love that. And there's the top of the proscenium arch, and I got these as slides from the Theater Historical Society of America, and I was convinced that there was something more to them, much more. So I will eventually start to digitally enhance these, and you'll see what I'm talking about. So this is one of the famous photographs taken in, I believe this is 1974, because the Wild, Wacky, and Funny Sugarland Express opened up in 1974. Woody Allen's Sleeper opened up in 1973. But you can see there's a doorway in between where it says XS, right? I'm getting to that. You're going to see a better image of it. There it is. That doors, those behind those doors led up to the Japanese gardens. But you see those signs as coming soon. Riverside Theater this way, Riviera Theater that way. Guess where those signs are now? There's my living room. All right, there it is. And there are those signs. So my plan is to clone the theaters back. Speaking of Sleeper, I'm going to clone them back from those signs. That's my plan. All right. So there we go. And above all of that is this. The Japanese Gardens, Fox's Japanese Gardens, originally planned as a glass enclosed structure. It opens up, depending on, again, who you believe, either May 31st, 1915 or 1913. I'm going to go with the 1915 date, all right? It was planned to seat 2,100 people. According to Cinema Treasures, it sat 1,024, but the Theater Historical Society of America puts that number at 1,495, so just 5 under 1,500, right? Pretty cool. It was operated by Fox, even though the movie on the left is a Fox picture, right? The movie on the right is an RKO picture. All right, here we have the similar situation. We have a Warner Brothers picture on one side, and I'm not even sure who produced this Joey Brown movie, but there you go. Now this Greatest Gamble, again, I'm not sure what studio that came from, but James Cagney was signed to Warner Brothers, as was Pat O'Brien, and that woman that he's got his little knuckle there under her chin, that's Gloria Stewart, who you might remember as Old Rose from the 1997 Titanic. All right, this is the Japanese Gardens. And it closes either in 1938, again, depending on who you believe, or in 1941 after the Pearl Harbor attack, right? So 1938 would have been because of a building code change. 1941, it's obvious. Things Japanese are not going to be all that popular. So what became of this theater? Well, I found an article from the New York Times in 1971 about a situation with this theater. It had been rented in the summer by David Merrick for a Hal Prince musical called Pretty Belle that was headed for Broadway. So, sorry, not David Merrick, it was Alexander Cohen. All right, so Alexander Cohen rents this theater in the summer. The problem is that the heating was not working and they couldn't rehearse Pretty Belle, which was a bomb. It starred Angela Lansbury. It just did not work out. So everybody's going to have a bomb. But this is, if Japan had had a Baroque period, it would have looked like this theater. So let's move on. That's looking from the stage into the house. You can see there's a projection booth, and that projection booth has got to be original because this was designed for movies. And what you can see also on the main floor, just to the left of the door there, the window's open or it's busted out. I can't tell which, but you can see the building across the street. So this had a lot of direct access to the street from a theater, which was unusual. Plus, I'm going to go back a second. Those are stained glass windows. And when I was a kid, I remember seeing the other side of them and they were boarded over. And I'm not sure why they boarded them over, but I think to protect them or maybe just to block light. But I remember thinking, wow, the balcony at the Riviera Theater is very high. It must be really, high up there, because when you're a kid and you go to that theater, it's dark. You really can't see the ceiling. You think it's going to be like an incredibly high balcony, right? So that's at least, from the Bugs Bunny cartoons, that kind of thing. So here's more of the balcony. And you can see it had a very large stage. The way they got up in there, nobody could actually tell them how to get up in there, but Michael Miller knew that there was a theater up there. So Michael Miller will go in through the Riviera, go backstage, and walked up 5 flights of stairs, and as he described it, dark, dank dressing rooms, and then ended up coming out into this theater where, again, they had to bring in their own lights because they did not have lighting. There was no power up there. There was a movie called, what the hell, it was with Don Johnson. It's called Stanley Moon, or oh God, I'm going blank on the name, but the point is they did use it, but it's totally unrecognizable as the theater. It's like these very quick shots and you really can't make out exactly what it is, but it is in that movie. All right. So this was going to be used as a rehearsal hall, but I do know that they did use it as a rehearsal hall for Bubbling Brown Sugar used it, and a few other shows did use it as well. All right. So as you can see, this is a very heavy-duty Japanese motif, and is Mount Fuji on the soundboard there. So that ain't going to work out during World War II. And the pagoda style of surround around the boxes, again, very Japanese. It will not work out. And I love these lamps. Oh, I would kill for one of those lamps. And that's dust hanging from that lamp. That's not broken. All right. So that's what that is. And what I focus in on this for, I'm not sure, but that's to show you the box rails on the orchestra floor. Those are boxes above. And I just got a little obsessed with this light. And it did have a Mahler organ, and I believe those are organ grills on the side there. It looks like they had been busted out over the years, but that is a Mahler 3-rank organ. And this is Lowe's 175th. The Guide Association in New York had a few meetings there, so I took pictures, absolutely. So this is the 5th of the Lowe's Wonder Theaters to open, and it will open in 1930. And it's as one person described it, as a hashish nightmare, but it's, again, if Southeast Asia went through a Baroque era, it would look just like this theater. All right, there you go. Now, the Riverside and Riviera, they're not going to be, oh, that's just another shot of that theater. There you go. Pretty good. All right, now, the Riverside and Riviera are not going to do so well. In June of 1974, an article appeared in the New York Times. In July of 1974, the article said that Chris Boomis, one of the city's most prolific and active developers, is planning to erect a 31-story building on the site of the old theaters. All right. Now, you can see that the stores are closed, the Barton's is closed, Chess City is closed, and there's a plywood wall at the entrance to the Riviera Theater. Now, what does happen is that Mr. Boomis is going to build a 31-story building of nothing but 1 bedrooms and studios, because he believed that the city was becoming more single-oriented than had been previously, known. That people are going to meet here, get married here, live here for a little bit, then move to the suburbs to have a family. That was his plan. That was his idea. There was a lot of fight about this site. Alexander's wanted it. Gimbel's wanted it. And that's interesting that these are both stores that don't exist anymore, but they wanted the site for a Gimbel's West or an Alexander's in upper, not upper Manhattan, but, the Bloomingdale neighborhood. All right. There's the theater on the roof. It was still there. But what does happen is that this is going to be torn down. Now, this photograph, which broke my heart as a kid, I remember seeing this, but the photograph was taken by a friend of mine, the late great Gene Hamilton. The curtain that's hanging there was a red velvet curtain, and it broke my heart that they left the curtain. They didn't even bother to take it out. They're going to tear down the theater with that. So you can see the proscenium arch of the Riverside Theater, and this is where it ended for Mr. Boomis. He ran out of money, all right? So he abandons the project. Now, people in the neighborhoods were saying, hey, it's a little unstable in there. It's getting a little bit wobbly. You got to do something. Well, the Riverside Theater had the last laugh, because on January 24th, 1975, the rest of the theater collapsed out into 96th Street. It crushed every car. As you can see, look at that car right there on the left side. It's flattened, man. That car's gone, right? So it flattened every car, and they were digging for days. You can see there's a crane there clearing out the debris. They were digging for days looking for bodies, because there were stories that there were people living in there. Back then, we just called them junkies. Now we would say unhoused, right? Whatever, they looked for bodies. They never found anybody. So maybe they did find something later, but I'll explain that. That is once the Riverside Theater has been pretty much cleared, except for the taxpayer structure all the way on the right side of the image. That is a view that we never saw. There's the boarded up windows of the Japanese gardens up top there. And you can see part of the problem here for this theater, that the fire escapes from above went back into the building. So that kind of made no sense. It kind of defeats the purpose. On the north side of the building, the fire escapes went all the way down to the street. There were only 2 elevators that went up to those theaters. That's it. A staircase was sealed off years earlier. So that's also part of the problem of getting people out of there in case of an emergency. This is not Michael Miller's photographs, but these were taken in 1975. As the Riviera Theater was finally becoming very unstable, the city will come in and tear it down. So this is what I said about enhancing photographs, all right? So this is what that photograph looked like before I enhanced it. There's the enhanced image. So you can see the stage a little bit better, but more importantly, you can see what's on the soundboard above the proscenium. A kind of like Life is Swell at Versailles. That was a very typical thing with these theaters. If you ever have the chance to go to the old Mark Hellinger Theater, now known as the Times Square Church, I'll put pictures up eventually on my Facebook page. That theater is gorgeous, and it uses a lot of those kind of images, like, after Watteau, kind of like Baroque era, wonderful, pastoral life. But that's what that image is. I think of a better image of it coming up. There you go. And you can see they left the curtain up. It's just covered with plaster dust and dirt. And those big things on the stage, those are speaker horns for the movie. And that frame, that wooden frame, that's for the screen. That desk there, I have no idea what it's doing there, but it's a desk there on the stage. There's a more close-up version of it. Looks like Marie Antoinette over there. There you go. So this is like a before and after situation. This broke my heart when I put these together. And I did nothing to align them. They lined up perfectly. But you can see where the boxes were. You can almost see where the doors were that led out to the boxes from some internal staircase. There it is again. These are enhanced so you can see them. So if you ever wondered what it looks like when they tear down a theater, this is what it looks like. Unbelievable. Just ripped it all out. Saved nothing. It's the end of the Riviera, excuse me. Riviera is about to disappear and will be gone forever and replaced by one of the ugliest buildings on the Upper West Side. That one. All right, broke my heart. I still have dreams about it. But one thing I don't dream about is the Midtown or the Metro Theater. Not because it was an ugly theater. It was actually a very nice theater, but I was never that enthused by it. All right, it opened in 1933 with 580 seats. And there it is. That's not the opening movie of the theater, but it's, it's close. It's the 30s. All right, there it is. There's the interior. That's the original interior, and some of us do remember this. I definitely remember this interior. Now, the thing about this interior is that it's gone. The theater was not landmarked. Only the exterior was landmarked. So the exterior is there, the interior is gone. And they did this to prevent landmarking of the interior. Because if you landmark the interior, that's it, man. You can't touch this theater. So to avoid that, the developer will destroy the interior and actually compromise the structure by the removing of the balcony. I guess the balcony was kind of holding the whole thing together. It's going to kind of make it kind of fall apart. It became the Midtown. I'm sorry, it was the Midtown originally. Let me go back there as Midtown, right? But it became also a, well, as you can see, adults only picture, all right? Like Hooker Convention is not a Disney film, all right? So the animals do not sing at the end of that movie. Point is that it did become the Metro Theater. It was taken over eventually by Cineplex Odeon, the Canadian company. Lost in Translation with Bill Murray is playing there. There you go. Kill Bill is also playing. So two things with the word Bill in it, and people were lining up for it. So the balcony theater was the good theater. The lower, the orchestra section, or what would be called the orchestra section, that was a terrible theater. I don't know if you remember that, but I do. And there's been plans over the last few years for this. At one point, Alamo was going to take it. Remember this? Hey, it's 2024. 10 years ago, Alamo was going to take it over, but they backed out, probably because of structural issues with the building. Also, Sephora backed out as well. Urban Outfitters, which eventually had a place across the street, they backed out of using this space as well. So now there's a story that someone's going to take it and do something in there. I'm not holding my breath. But this is a computer-generated rendering of Benny's, a retail space, and there's Janovic, which I don't know if it's still there, and I think they moved across the street. But the point is I think it's an urgent care thing. I swear, if life ended on this in this city right now, or on this planet, and aliens in 1,000 years came here, they think that we were nothing but a bunch of bank-going, cell phone using sick people. That's all they think we were. All right, that's it. One of the last theaters along Broadway is this theater that had more names than any theater should ever have. It opens as the Broadway Photoplay Theater in 1913. It was renamed the 103rd Street Theater by 1925, the Essex by 1928, and finally the Edison Theater in 1933, and then eventually the name Nouveau Edison was applied to it, and eventually by 1987, Cineplex Odeon takes it over and calls it the Columbia Cinema. All right, now, according to Cinema Treasures, it had 610 seats. The Theater Historical Society of America says a mere 600. All right, so there you go. This is 1939, and the building right next to it, in between the automat, there's the Horn and Hardart automat, and the theater, that is one of the oldest buildings on the Upper West Side. I have a photograph taken from the roof of that building, July 3rd, 1888. So that that speculatively built commercial on the bottom, residential on top structure is one of the oldest buildings on the Upper West Side. So there it is, 10 cents until 1 p.m. at the Edison Theater. This is from, let's see what year this is from. I think it's it, right? Yeah, well, this is, as early as this could be 1945. It has to do with the movies that are playing there. My Sister Eileen with George. It sounds like a Warner Brother picture because George Tobias is in it, but this is the non-musical version of Wonderful Town. Rosalind Russell's husband owned the rights to the show. That's why there was never a movie version of it, because he wanted his wife to play the part that she originated on Broadway, and the studios said she's too old, which she was, all right, which is too bad. But that is from at least 1945. There you go. And then, of course, it became the famous Spanish language motion picture theater that we all knew and loved. Todos los películas de Cantinflas. That was a thing, all right? And moving right along, there you go. This is from 1989, and there was a bodybuilding contest held within inside. So there's the Sloans in the old automat. Remember Sloans? Yeah. All right. I called that one the Sloans of the Living Dead. Anyway, the interior. Very few people remember the interior, but here you go. That's the interior. This was one of the first purposely built movie theaters, built as a movie theater, not something else, not a legit theater or vaudeville theater that showed movies. It was built as a movie theater. No shows, just a theater. That's it. The Olympia, the long-lost Olympia Theater. This was, of course, on 107th Street and Broadway. According to Motion Picture News, it had the largest screen of any theater Um, ever built. It was designed by an architect named Hugo Kohler, and an opening date is either 1913, according to Theater Historical Society of America, or 1914. That's according to Cinema Treasures. Motion Picture News puts the seating capacity at 1,600. The Theater Historical Society at 1,320. And just to round it out with a third input thing here, Cinema Treasures says 1,162. All right. So, of course, the theaters had their own program. This did have an orchestra that played along with the movies. And some of you may remember this theater, some of you may not. But it was, when I was a kid, it had been turned into a quad. It was unquadded eventually and turned into a triplex. Sorry, a twin, not a triplex. But there's looking down towards the stage, to the screen anyway, but there was a stage, as you can see in this image, right? There's a staircase there that leads you up to a very deep something that was a stage. So I never found direct evidence that there was any live performance here, but I do believe that this theater had been built with a stage. All right. And it's because of this. And then I zoomed in there so you can see it all the way there in the bottom left corner. That is definitely a platform of some kind, and it looks like it goes back a ways. So the screen would have been in front of, well, would have been, you would not be seeing this if the screen was down, or the screen would go up into the fly loft. They would drop it down for the movie, right? So like I said, according to Motion Picture News, this had the largest screen of any theater in the world. This was in 1914. So that kind of makes me think the 1914 date is correct. All right. So there's the stage again. That's just some side treatment. This theater had undergone several renovations over the years. The Skouras brothers had it for a while, so you know they're going to mess it up. But the point is, there you go. Now, the last theater along Broadway is the Nemo. And the Nemo, it was built on the site of what had been known as the Lion Palace Music Hall. The Lion Palace Music Hall had been part of the Lion Brewery. And when Mr., well, I forget his first name, but it was Schmidt, when he passed away, he left his wife, Josephine, a kind of not a huge fortune, but a big enough chunk of change, and of course some property, which included the old Lion Palace Music Hall. It was built before 1898, that we do know. And it was maybe a very altered structure that became the Nemo Theater. So this is a plan for two Thomas Lamb theaters, and I just didn't want to separate them because they're very similar. But the 145th Street Theater is called the Odeon. It's now a church. The one on Clinton Street is gone, but the Nemo Theater is definitely gone, and it had a stage. So that kind of like, you know, confirms that. You can see there's an orchestra pit there as well. All right. The dotted line indicates the where the fire curtain would be. All right. And it was probably a very altered structure from the pre-1898 structure. The Theater Historical Society will say that it was built by William Fox. I think it was rebuilt by William Fox. All right. And Cinema Treasure says in 1919, Fox took over, but this theater had been around for a while. This is actually an insurance map, which does show you a stage. It says stage right there. And then the auditorium, I'm not sure, what the scale is here, but it has got to be in scale because they are indicating a lot of things like where pipes are, water mains, things like that. So this is an insurance company's thing for this theater. But here's the theater. That's the stage. It did open with seven acts of vaudeville, according to again, Theater Historical Society of America in 1910, September 27th, 1910. And these are the movies that will end up being, playing there. We got movies from 1934 listed there and 1932. And it was a first run house, as indicated by the ad all the way on the left side. First run showing Will Rogers in Judge Priest. There you go. All right. Now, this is the tax ID photo from 1939. And showing you that this is like the same, almost the same, the same double bill as what's playing at the Riverside Theater. So we're talking, how many blocks is this? 14? Not even a mile. You have two theaters showing the same thing. Listen, if they weren't going to make money, they wouldn't have done it, right? That's the theater. That's my theory. All right. Anyway, this theater is important in motion picture history, because here in 1926, the movie tone sound on film process was first demonstrated. So people got to hear for the first time in 1926, not when the Jazz Singer opened. It had already been done, but that's pretty amazing. So what do I have next? I think that's it. Oh, honeymoon's over, and there it is. Same movies. 1939. And that's it with the big theater. So let me see if I can figure out how to reduce this. I don't have to reduce it. We can see if we have any questions. So do we have any questions? I'm going to start taking questions to a Q&A now. I can't see what's in
Thank
the
you.
chat.
Oh, thank you, Gary. Let's see. Actually, yeah, if you want to get rid of the screen sharing, that would help with the chat. But if not, then that's fine.
Stop share.
Um,
Okay. Oh, there you
there
go.
we go.
Yeah.
All right. So we do have a few questions. I believe Cynthia asked a question, but she left a little earlier. This is regarding, I believe, back when you were talking about the Talia. Why was the theater designed to slope up instead of down?
They felt uh it was more comfortable just to do this. So I don't know if you can tell what I'm doing. I'm looking up. All right. So that literally that's what they thought. So that's I
Got
mean
it. All right.
yeah. I mean, no
Yeah.
other theater did that. So it was just an experiment that I don't know kind of worked. So I don't see
We have
yes.
another question from Angel early on saying, do you know of any issues about segregation in the theaters back early in the day?
There had to have been. There's I do know specifically about Lowe's Victoria on 125th Street that a lawyer had a friend of his buy tickets for him. It was another lawyer. It was a white lawyer bought tickets for his black friend, and when he went to pick up the tickets at the theater, he was told, "Oh, we're sorry, those seats are gone. But we have seats for you in the balcony." So it was not a written thing, but there had to have been. So uh, that's what I'm saying. There had to have been.
Got it. Got it. Do you know what street the New Yorker was on?
80,
88.
88th, yeah, 88th. Almost at 89th, 88th. In fact, I found an old photograph of the Adelphi, and it had to do with the Interborough Rapid Transit Company adding an emergency exit at 88th Street. So some of you may remember there's an emergency exit right outside where that theater was. Some people think it's the entrance to the 91st Street subway station. It is not. So there you go.
We have another question here. Do you have any daylight pictures of the 103rd Street Theater in the 80s?
I wish. No, I don't. I don't. There's all these things that you wish you had a camera for, or at least a phone with a camera. It's, oh my God, the things that I wish I could go back and photograph. It's just unbelievable. But
And then
I
if you have
don't.
any recommendations as to where that person might hope to
Well,
find something like that?
if I haven't found them, you ain't gonna find them. All right, because I spent way too many hours looking for them. So Uh, I mean, I felt like I hit like a gold mine when I found the bodybuilding championship inside the theater. I never went to that theater as the Edison. There was a scene that was filmed in there in a movie called Madigan with Richard Widmark and Henry Fonda as the police commissioner. And the bulk of the film was shot in New York, and they did film a scene inside that theater. And you can see the old pizzeria on the corner of 104th Street. So it's really sometimes these movies are worth it to see just because of where they filmed, and what you can see in those films. So
Thank you. And then do you know when oh yeah, when did the Olympia Theater disappear?
that was in like, oh my goodness, I think it was on 2002. And I remember that it had closed and it was sort of gutted. They were doing drilling in there to see how deep or how much room there was for a building to go up. There was a myth about that spot that there was a large outcropping of rock, like a solid piece of rock that would have made it very uh, what's the word? Cost effective, to build something there of any height because they would have to blast that rock. So I went in there and there was a truck parked in the lobby, like in the inner lobby, and they had a drill on it. And the guy told me that's what they're drilling for. But there was a movie called Solaris with George Clooney, and I think that was one of the last movies to play there. And also Cineplex Odeon went through some sort of financial problem. I think they went under in the early O's. So that's when that theater is going to go.
Got it. Thank you. Then the other one is, do you know anything about what happened to the theater around 66th Street and Broadway? I believe this is the one that showed foreign films and had
Oh,
underground.
there was two theaters near each other. One was the region the Regency, and the Regency is now the site of, I believe, the Apple Store. And again, that is not the original name of that theater. It was built specifically for movies. There was another theater across the street, right next to the funeral home that hosted Rudolph Valentino's funeral home, called Cinema Studio, and those are all gone. And I saw Showa. Remember the movie Showa, the documentaries? There was two parts, 4.5 hours each, and I saw them there. So that's what I don't remember the specific dates of those. I really kind of wanted to focus just on 74th Street, to the beacon to the Nemo. That's exactly what I used to call this tour, a beacon to the Nemo. So there you go. And Angel, I don't know. When am I going to curate movies on TCM? Man, I'd love to. I would love to do that because there's so many New York movies, even movies that just did a minimal amount of location shooting. There's a movie called Sweet Smell of Success with Burt Lancaster and Tony Curtis, which I have memorized, all right, because I'm obsessive and I used to watch it every Friday morning in the store. So I've seen it at least 400 times. And the movie was shot here. They did only 3 weeks of location shooting, but you'd swear the whole thing was shot here. And there's so much stuff in that movie that's amazing in terms of New York City history. So, and we have any other
And
questions?
last
Yeah,
question
sure.
I see here is, do you know what the ELT theater was at the master's apartment before it was the ELT theater?
Okay, so the thing about the Masters, which is a whole separate tour unto itself, is it was a vertical utopian society, basically. Everything was taken care of you. And I have a feeling there's someone on this that may have been there back in the 70s with me. But that theater was the lecture hall, film, they show films there, concerts, things like that for residents of the building. You'd have to understand and know the history of that building. It was the concept for the building was from a man named Nicholas Rourke, who was an artist, a lawyer by trade, but his parent, because it was what his parents wanted him to be, and also a theosophist, which is a blend of metaphysics and theology. And if you remember Ghostbusters, the whole story about a spooky building, that's the Masters. In fact, they took the story and just, kind of exaggerated it, and they wanted a more famous address, but the original location would have been the Masters. So ELT moved in there in the early 60s, and the people that came out of that theater include Eli Wallach and Ann Jackson. They met there. Tony Randall will success spoil Rock Hunter because he was seen in a show at Equity Library Theater. When I was a kid, when I was painting sets there was a guy named Tom Wopat playing Curly in Oklahoma. The next thing you know, he's a Duke of Hazzard. So, it really runs the gamut of people that came through there. Even Kevin Bacon, Cynthia Nixon, they all went through there. So it was an amazing, amazing place. And I was an art major at music and art. I wanted to paint sets, but what they had me do was just basically, okay, see all that stuff, paint it all black, and then we're going to do something on top of it. So I once in a while, a designer would let me do something, but it was about showcasing them too, not me. So that's what it was about.
Okay.
And I know that people are gonna. Is this recorded and people are gonna watch it on a
Yeah,
playback?
so
Yeah. Let
it'll
me just
be
tell them
on
how to
our
get it.
YouTube channel.
Let me just tell them how to get a question to me. All right. So if you have a question or you think of something later, New York Tours by Gary on Facebook and Instagram. It may take me a day to get back to you, but I will answer. If you took the time to watch this thing and you took the time to ask me a question, I will answer your question. All right. So otherwise I'll just be trimming this mustache, so
All
that's
right.
it.
Thank you, Gary.
Well, thank you guys. Thank you all so much for coming, and thank you Bloomingdale Neighborhood Historic Group because I love the group. So thank you.
Thank
All
you,
right.
Gary. A that
Yep.
was a great show.
Thank you. Thank you, Gil. If you say so. Anyway, I got to talk extra loud because Jim's in Morocco. So,
Yeah.
Jim Mackin's living it up in Morocco. So there you go.
Well, he'll watch it on YouTube, I guess.
All right. And also, I know that there's some GANIC members on this. Thank you, GANIC members, for coming. Guide Association New York, 50 years. There you go. So thank you. And thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you so much.
Okay.
All right. Have a good night.